Hello Internet, so here it is, as promised in my last video, the Let's Talk about Ian McKellen, theatre and future. My ranking of the movies that have been made so far that have been set in the Middle-earth world created by J.R.R. Tolkien. I was hoping that I could find, or that I owned even, a t-shirt that was Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit related, but I couldn't find one, so you're going to have to settle for this supernatural one here. But I do have my Gandalf Arrives Lego set, which I got a couple of months ago, in the background there, so that's something at least. So I'm not going to spend too much time on each film, like analysing and reviewing it, just simply because, to be honest with you, there's other videos out there that do a much better job, I think, than I could ever do. Really, I'm going to talk a little bit about my feelings about each film as I'm going through it, and maybe summarise it a little bit more as I get towards the end of each sort of thing. So yeah, there it is. Also, I won't be including the animated film of The Lord of the Rings, just simply because I've only seen it once, I think, so not really well enough to remember it, because I think it was a while ago. And plus which, if I remember rightly, it wasn't finished. It was kind of, it wasn't like the whole story told in one or a series of films. It was up until a point, and then it just stopped and they didn't make any more. So I don't really think that it's fair to sort of include that, given that it wasn't finished, really. So yeah, there we go. So, number 6, and my least favourite of all of the Middle-earth films so far, is The Battle of the Five Armies. If you was to ask my girlfriend about this film, there would be aspects of it that bordered on probably rage. For me, it's more just high disappointment and a fair bit of annoyance, really. Not, interestingly though, not when I first saw the film. When I first saw all of the Hobbit films, I came away with the opinion that they weren't as good as The Lord of the Rings, but that they were quite good, and I quite enjoyed them. Then I read the book, and I saw Tolkien's original vision for how he wanted the Hobbit story to go. And I saw how much the two diverged and how much license the filmmakers took with differences and whatnot. And I'm not averse to filmmakers or TV series makers diverging from source material that they use if they're doing an adaptation. I'm not opposed to that idea at all. In fact, I think it can be quite good in a lot of cases. But in this case, unfortunately not. There's too much that they put in there that just wasn't necessary, specifically in this film as well. For example, the whole love story aspect between Killy, Tauriel and Legolas, like a love triangle, Romeo and Juliet-esque type situation, which the film never called for, and the source material certainly never called for. It wasn't needed in there, and I think even the actors as well didn't like the fact that it was in there. They didn't want it in there necessarily. I like the idea of them creating a new character in Tauriel for these films. I think that was a good idea, and I think Evangeline Lilly is a great actor, and she added a lot to the film. But the love aspect, the love story aspect to it, it wasn't necessary, and it caused the film, I think, to focus more on the elves than maybe it needed to. This is a story about the dwarves, about Thorin's company trying to retake their home, basically, and it should have focused on that, with maybe a little bit of divergence into other things, but it should have focused on that. And this love story angle to it, it took away from the film rather than adding to it, I think. Another character that they added in that wasn't necessary and that featured more heavily, I think, in battle and in Smaug as well, but battle more than anything was the character of Alfred. Right, what to say about Alfred? He was clearly a character that was put into the film because they wanted a bit of levity to it. They wanted a comedy relief character. Unfortunately, if you're going to do that, you need to do it well. I think if you're under a certain age, you'll probably find Alfred quite funny. My girlfriend's nieces, I think, find him quite funny. They're 8 and under. And the people who would have read The Hobbit are older than that. And I think that's who you need to aim the film at, really. So, yeah, not a fan of that. But, in my eyes, anyway, the biggest problem with this film, specifically, anyway, is the end of Philly and Killy. If you've read the book, you'll know that Philly and Killy, in short, basically die defending Thorin's body. But Thorin has been fighting with Bolg, who is the main antagonist of the book. In the film, it's Azog. Not really sure why they changed that, but they did. So he's been fighting Bolg, and he's finished the fight. He's mortally wounded, and they die defending his body. That's beautiful. What they do in the film, however, is, as a conclusion to the whole pointless love angle that they tried to shoehorn into it, is they had Philly being thrown off of a high wall by one of the baddies, and then Killy just goes on a murder rampage and tries to get revenge, and eventually dies himself. I get what they were trying to go for, but it's not as powerful. It was a disservice to the characters. And there's just too many problems with that for me to kind of forgive. So the Battle of the Five Armies takes its place right down at the bottom of this list. Next on the list, number 5, my second least favourite, is The Desolation of Smaug. Just in case you didn't know what the Blu-ray cover looked like. So The Desolation of Smaug is a few steps above the Battle of the Five Armies, to be fair. It did introduce this whole love triangle aspect, but I felt that it was more of a problem in the Battle of the Five Armies than it was in this. A few good parts about this film, though. It's got Benedict Cumberbatch in there as the voice of Smaug, who is pretty much terrific, whether he's on screen or not on screen, doing voiceovers. So he's great. But yeah, that's The Desolation of Smaug for you. A little bit more shorter than the rant that I had about the Battle of Five Armies. Number 4 on this list is An Unexpected Journey. I mean, the perfect way to start, I think. The Unexpected Journey, while in my books not as good as any of the Lord of the Rings films, obviously, because it's come in before them, it was a great start to telling this Hobbit story, the film version of the Hobbit. You've got Gandalf comes back, Ian McKellen as Gandalf comes back. You've got Martin Freeman playing Bilbo, who is terrific in the role. You introduce all the dwarves, specifically, who gives a great performance, I think, throughout. Richard Armitage as Thorin, very powerful screen presence, perfect for the role, I think. Such a great start to an otherwise disappointing end to the trilogy. And definitely my favourite out of the Hobbit movies. It's brilliant. So, there we are. That's the Hobbit movies. The bottom end of this list. As a whole, I think that the Hobbit movies suffered with a number of problems. As I've said, they added stuff in that didn't need to be in there. As well as that, though, they use too much CGI instead of hiring extras like they did in Lord of the Rings. But what you got, I mean, if you look at the main baddie from the Hobbit movies, Azog, and you compare him to a baddie who only appeared in one of the Lord of the Rings films, Lurtz, and you put them side by side, I know which one I'd say I'd be most scared of. Lurtz. That guy's scary. I mean, just look at him. I just think you need that person behind the makeup, the eyes are what do it for me with Lurtz. Although not in a sexual way. So, here we go. So, anyway, number 3 on the list is The Fellowship of the Ring. In exactly the same way as An Unexpected Journey was the perfect way to start telling the story of The Hobbit, The Fellowship of the Ring is the perfect way to start telling the story of the Lord of the Rings. It's a great film and it gets you hooked. This film just has so many great moments in it. The scene with Gandalf and the Balrog at the bridge of Khazad-dûm, with the "You shall not pass" bit, brilliant. And the film is perfectly cast, so well put together, just all the way throughout. I really think that obviously Peter Jackson had a specific vision for these films, which he stuck to throughout. So, number 2, my second favourite out of all of them is The Return of the King. Now, The Return of the King has arguably my favourite scene from all of the movies in it, which is the charge of the Rohirrim at the Pelennor Fields when they're riding in to save Gondor from the forces of Mordor. I get goosebumps every time I see it. Honestly, it's the best scene in the entire series of films, I think. The score in it is amazing, and just the whole fight sequence, and it's just terrific. But the only reason why Return of the King is second place and not first place really is the whole thing with the Ghost Army, and some of the CGI fight sequences and stuff that take place after that scene that I've just talked about. Legolas taking down the Oliphant, for one thing, which just looked a bit silly, really. But on the whole, again, it's a brilliant film. It's the conclusion of my favourite film trilogy ever. Yes, even more favourite than Star Wars because it's better. And yeah, there's Return of the King. And now, my favourite, you've probably already guessed, so there's not much point in me saying it, but I'm going to anyway, The Two Towers. Yes, the film which focuses pretty much a large portion of itself onto Rohan and the Rohirrim, who is my favourite faction from all of Lord of the Rings. They're cool, and they ride on horses, and I love horses as well. So, and also, as much as I appreciate the big battle that we've got for Gondor in The Return of the King, I do prefer the more tense nature, certainly that leads up to the battle for Helm's Deep, and the very fact that it's a very small force of not fighters, really. A lot of these guys that are manning the wall at Helm's Deep are probably farmers and, you know, tinkerers and tailors and not soldiers or spies. They're not combat people, I don't think. They'll be just anyone that could take up arms and defend their people against this oncoming horde of Uruk-hai. And they don't do very well. The castle wall gets breached, and they're moments away from death, and then there's that big charge out into the bad guys' army of Theoden and Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas, obviously, and all the good guys that are there. And then you've got the great scene of Gandalf arriving over the hill with the Rohirrim that he went off to get to save the day, and it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. Favourite film out of the entire thing. So there we go. Yeah, what did you think to this list? Would you put the films in a different order? Do you think I've been unfair to the Hobbit films? Do you think I've been too fair to the Lord of the Rings films? Just let me know in the comments. Just remember to be polite about it. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And drop me a like and a subscribe if you like this video. And yeah, so I'll see you next time.